Fleetwood Mac, a classic rock juggernaut. As a stan, I may be a little biased, but the meteoric success of their 1977 album Rumours makes their status as one of the greatest bands in the world pretty undeniable. By now, most people who know anything about Fleetwood Mac probably know about the making of Rumours, how both couples in the band, one made up of keyboard player Christine McVie and bassist John McVie, and the other being vocalist Stevie Nicks and guitarist Lindsey Buckingham, were breaking up, with each of the vocalists writing their own songs about it, meaning the members of the band had to sing and play songs written about them by the other members of the band, and not super flattering songs either. All this drama produced a top-notch album, and I'm sure the fame and fortune it brought them went a long way to make up for the emotional trauma. Drummer Mick Fleetwood, one of the founding members of the band, was the only one whose significant other was not in the band, and thus he always characterized himself as the quote-unquote piggy in the middle, trying to keep the peace amongst his bandmates and making sure the show went on. But by the time Rumours was getting made, Mick also found himself in a long drawn-out process of separating and then divorcing his own wife, Jenny Boyd, whose sister, Pattie Boyd, was married to Beatle George Harrison, by the way. Next to the low-key McVies, whose British reserve kept most of their issues out of the public eye, the drama between the band's American members, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, became a central theme in the band's appeal to their fans and to the general public alike, with the duo keeping up their onstage antics to this day. There's certainly a lot to be said about Stevie and Lindsey, and much of it has already been said. But amongst all the drama and conflama of 1970s Fleetwood Mac, something else took place. Something that wasn't made public until many years later. In a haze of drugs and heartbreak, an unlikely pair found solace in each other's arms, sneaking around at first as to not incur their bandmates' wrath, particularly a certain bandmate, until it was obvious to everyone around them that something was going on. In this video, we'll dive into the hows and whys of Fleetwood Mac's lesser-known couple, Stevie Nicks and Mick Fleetwood. Hello, my restless friends. Welcome to Too Lady to Rest, where we talk about art, culture, and all things vintage gossip. Fleetwood Mac's history is as weird and unconventional as its members, who never quite managed to match the success of Rumours, not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't compromise their art. Well, Lindsey Buckingham wouldn't, and everybody sort of just followed suit because he was just that hard-headed and talented, and the band believed him and trusted him enough to basically just let him do whatever he wanted a lot of the time. Fleetwood Mac originally formed as an English blues band in the 1960s, founded by Peter Green, a brilliant blues guitarist who was often compared to Eric Clapton, plus a second guitarist called Jeremy Spencer, as well as drummer Mick Fleetwood, and bassist Bob Brunning, who was aware he was to stay only until they could persuade John McVie to join. The band was originally called Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. Yes, Peter Green named the band after John McVie before John McVie had even agreed to join the band. That's how much he loved Fleetwood and McVie's rhythm section, eventually even dropping his own name from the band name, leaving just Fleetwood Mac.
Ooh, you know what? Maybe just Fleetwood Mac.
At this point, Christine McVie, then called Christine Perfect, that's right, Christine was perfect until she married John McVie, a running joke amongst the band and its inner circle for the next several decades. Christine was in another band at the time called Chicken Shack, who often performed with Fleetwood Mac at blues and jazz festivals. After she and John McVie fell in love and got married, she was gradually integrated into the band as a keyboard player, particularly once Peter Green left the band after an LSD-fueled mental breakdown in the early 1970s, which had led him to believe he was Jesus and try to form a cult. Bizarrely, the other Fleetwood Mac guitarist, Jeremy Spencer, would also leave the band around this time in order to, and I kid you not, join the infamous cult Children of God, known for having traumatized numerous celebrities from Rose McGowan to Joaquin Phoenix. I find this coincidence fascinating because Fleetwood Mac itself has always had a sort of cult-like undertone to their internal dynamics in all of their incarnations, but particularly post-Buckingham Nicks. The band expected unfailing loyalty from each of their members despite circumstances that were often toxic and abusive, and many of its members have mentioned mentioned that when they get together, the kind of magic they make is more powerful than the sum of the parts, and it felt simply too unique to let go, so they held on, no matter what. Stevie describes their dynamic in her 1980 song Fireflies, which was released in Fleetwood Mac's live album. Obviously, I can't play you the song, so I'm just gonna read out the lyrics like a dork. To be the last in the line from the ones that live on, silhouette of a dream treasured by the ones who held on to it. Long distance winners, will we survive the flight? Not one of us runs from the firelight. No one ever leaves. Everyone stays close till the fire fades. What happened to my feelings? We are dreamers in the night. Some call it my nightmare, my 5 fireflies. Now you might be asking yourself, why am I giving you all this context on the band's history when this video is obviously about the Buckingham Nicks era of the band, which was much later? Well, I just need to impart on you just how weird and unconventional Fleetwood Mac has always been. It's in the band's DNA. They're one of the few bands of the era, for instance, to have a mixed lineup, at a time when having women in a rock band was considered a terrible idea. Why, you might ask? Well, in one word, misogyny. In 2 words, misogyny and sexism. In 3 words, misogyny, sexism, and outdated notions of gender and gender dynamics, and the insidious male fear of being disabused of their perceived superiority by being outperformed by female artists. That's more than 3 words, but you get the drift. Now, I'm not saying that Fleetwood Mac is some kind of bastion of feminism and gender equality. It's no accident that both its female members, Christine McVie and Stevie Nicks, had to choose not to marry, not to have children, in order to prioritize their careers. They knew that if they didn't do that, they'd be left behind. Meanwhile, all the male members of the band have had multiple wives and children at various points of their careers with literally no consequence. But my point is that there's always been something unconventional about Fleetwood Mac, something strange, something quirky, and their genuine joy at being part of their weird little group was a significant point of connection between Stevie and Mick. By the end of 1974, Fleetwood Mac was down their 2 guitarists and actively looking for a replacement. They'd had another guitarist in the meantime, Bob Welch, who also left the band due to mental health concerns. Stevie, meanwhile, was singing as a duo with her then boyfriend, guitarist Lindsey Buckingham, and struggling to make it in the music business. The story goes that Mick Fleetwood heard a track from Stevie and Lindsey's 1973 album Buckingham Nicks completely by chance, and both captivated by Lindsey's guitar playing and in dire need of a new guitarist, Mick decided to ask Lindsey to join the band. Lindsey brought in his girlfriend Stevie as a condition, to which the band agreed because they needed Lindsey. But in actuality, right before Mick heard the music, he actually crossed paths with Stevie in the studio, and he was immediately captivated by her, even remembering what she was wearing. This is how he describes it, quote, "My attention had been caught by what I saw through the thick glass that separated Sound City's 2 studios. It was a girl, and she was rehearsing a song in the next room. A piano track was playing, and I could hear her say something to the assistant engineer about wanting to have bird songs somewhere in the final mix of the song she was working on. I even remember what she was wearing, a long sort of Indian-y cotton skirt and a little blouse. Really pretty." End quote. By the way, this is likely the Birds Rising demo of Rhiannon, which is actually available on YouTube. In it, you can hear her asking a Richard, likely their sound engineer friend Richard Ashett, for a recording of the rustling sound of quote-unquote Birds Rising, which she wanted to include in the song Rhiannon, newly written by then and meant for Buckingham Nicks' second album, which never came to be. Stevie was also struck by Mick's appearance, being as he was 6'6", dressed quite eccentrically, and accompanied by his 2 little girls he had with his wife Jenny. She was equally impressed when they finally met officially in January 1975 for a dinner that would cement her and Lindsey's entry into the band. Quote, "He was wearing a burgundy silk vest with a watch chain and a very long jacket that was nipped at the waist, and beautifully made pants. I was awestruck. I still am to this day of Mick's presence. The whole air around him is of power." End quote. There's also this hilarious clip.
"And we became, from the day that we all met at a Mexican restaurant and they drove up in these 2 wild Cadillacs, white, like with the fins, and they like clunked up, Lizzie and I are like going, these people are strange. And they get out, and it's like, it was really love at first sight. I mean, it was like, how could you not love these people, you know?
From the way they describe their unofficial meeting, it's clear how much of an impact they made on one another. And their comments in later years show that the awe and admiration they felt for one another remained strong despite the band's tribulations. Indeed, a lot of Stevie and Mick's connection was due to their shared sense of mysticism and enchantment. In Mick's words, quote, "Stevie wanted to bring mysticism into the band, which I supported completely because I do believe that there are many aspects to our existence greater than we are. It was an unspoken thing between us because we understood each other right away, recognizing a fellow drama queen. She's incredibly normal and grounded and a really humorous person, one just as silly as I am. Without that sense of humor, I doubt she would have survived all of the trials and tribulations in her life." End quote. Stevie and Mick often took it upon themselves to keep up the band's spirits, being the most extroverted, cheerful, and friendly members of the band. John McVie was so taciturn, he would live on a boat by himself when not recording or performing. Chris was just as elusive and reclusive, except when expressing herself through her music, and Lindsey was a moody and capricious artiste. Meanwhile, Stevie and Mick often attempted to bring some levity and harmony to their often tense group dynamics. It's not a coincidence that Stevie and Mick are the two figures on the cover of Rumours. That's symbolic of their sort of spokespeople role for the band. After the overwhelming success of songs like Rhiannon and Dreams, which remains Fleetwood Mac's only #1 single, Stevie obviously became the face of the band. Although his role as a drummer sort of naturally placed Mick in the background, he has been on the cover of the band's albums since before the Buckingham era, and he was even band manager for the band's first few years. Mick himself will admit that he wasn't very good at that, despite having the best of intentions. His role as a leader for the band was more intuitive and spiritual in nature. He refused to have Lindsey audition for the band, for instance, which Lindsey actually offered to do. But Mick really prided himself on making choices for the band based on vibes alone. This eventually got him fired as manager in 1980, after the band's extravagant tour expenses, of which Mick and Stevie in particular happily took part, left them very little profit for their effort, and Mick was accused of mismanaging funds. But even before they performed for a live audience, Mick was completely convinced of Stevie's appeal. Quote, "It was wonderfully overwhelming. Watching Stevie dance around the studio as she worked out her vocal parts, one thought kept pounding through my head. There wasn't an audience alive that wouldn't respond to her when we hit the road." End quote. He describes their connection thus, quote, "Stevie was free to be herself. She spent much of her time wrapped in a shawl with a cup of tea to mend her chronically sore throat, writing and drawing in her journals. She was, and is, sweet, funny, and witty. She was a soulmate to me immediately. We are both romantic, dramatic souls who have no problem being silly at the drop of a hat. In Fleetwood Mac, she found other people to hang out with and make music with, and she'd never had that outside of Lindsey." End quote. Mick and Stevie simply matched each other's freaks in a very specific way, which I think is pretty well illustrated by this excerpt from their 1997 reunion tour, The Dance. Look at Mick's face in the background. They were so similar, in fact, that Mick says they coped with the pressure in the same way, which is to say by partying a bit too hard. And they were buddies in this all the way. Mick and Stevie were the biggest cocaine addicts in the band, by far, although the whole band was having copious amounts of drugs at this point. The so-called studio culture of the 1970s was deeply extravagant and decadent. Drugs and alcohol were free-flowing and were often included as part of the studio's service. As band manager, Mick took it upon himself to organize the distribution of drugs to the members of the band to keep up their energy and morale during the perfectionist band's long hours in the studio. He called it transcend, basically hanging out and getting high, and the consumption and enjoyment of substances was a huge part of the mystical component of the band's experience. Mick's cocaine consumption was so legendary, he was called the King of Toot, which is slang for cocaine, a play, of course, on King Tut. For Stevie, cocaine became such an issue that 10 years later in 1987, she had to go to rehab for it. And weird rumors about her cocaine habit still abound. I think you see where I'm going with this. Drugs were a huge part of why Stevie and Mick got together in the first place. Their strong connection came from the same place that made them vulnerable to drugs, and to uppers in particular. An openness and a great hunger for a connection that felt greater than themselves. Even so, the band was aware that they were playing with something dangerous. When they were recording what would be their first album with Buckingham Nicks, simply titled Fleetwood Mac, Mick decided to keep all the bottles of alcohol consumed by the band during the recording process in a box near the studio exit, as a sort of tribute to the intensity of the experience. With his typical dramatic flair, he called it, quote, the graveyard beside the battleground, end quote. Their intention was to take a photograph at the end of the process and include it in the album's sleeve. Soon, however, the bottles could no longer be contained by their original box, and kept piling up higher and higher until they nearly took over the whole studio, while the album was nowhere near done. It was bumming everybody out so badly they finally gave up on the project and discarded the bottles. During those first couple of years, Stevie was really insecure about her role in the band and the reception she'd get from the critics and fans. She was acutely aware of the reason why she got into the band in the first place. Technically not due to her own merits, but because she was the girlfriend of a musician whose talents were wanted, and her boyfriend had been loyal enough to say he'd only do it if they accepted his girlfriend too, because they were a quote-unquote package deal. That meant that every single bad or even neutral review got deeply under her skin. Mick, who again described himself as the band's court jester, took it upon himself to console her and cheer her up, repeatedly telling her how much the band loved her and needed her. Although he may have been projecting some of his own feelings of love and admiration for Stevie, he believed it to be 100% true. This is a stark contrast to how Stevie was treated by her now ex, Lindsey Buckingham, who was notoriously horrible to her in studio and on stage after their breakup. Deeply hurt that Stevie had, in his view, abandoned him, and hotly jealous of the attention she was getting from the public, Lindsey was often derisive and hurtful towards Stevie and her contributions to the band. It's easy to see then how Mick's sweet and gentlemanlike treatment of her might have been appealing. There's a clip from their 2004 documentary Destiny Rules about the making of Fleetwood Mac's post-reunion album Say You Will that really illustrates how Mick has always treated Stevie and how much she clearly enjoys being treated that way. In it, Stevie is arriving at Lindsey's home studio to present some of her demos to the band. She brings with her a statue for luck and protection, which clearly matters to her a great deal. While the rest of the band has always been tolerant yet blasé about Stevie's mystical side and superstitions, Mick is appreciative of her gesture and moves to help her find a nice spot for the statue, thus making sure to validate her feelings, something that Lindsey isn't really inclined to do. Though the camera is not on them at that moment, it's Mick who suggests they place the statue on the mantle, which Stevie enthusiastically agrees to.
Oh my goodness me.
What is
Was
that?
ist das?
Spirit catcher.
A spirit catcher.
Where can we put it?
Well,
Somewhere
you
where
can put it in
catch
your
us.
area if you want, or if you wanted to sort of
This needs to
wash
be
out
there.
over the whole area, then we're going to have
On the
to put it
mantle,
on the
maybe.
mantle.
On the mantle, maybe.
All right,
Okay.
then let's do that.
Am I there? Let me take it from you.
Okay. It's been in my house in Phoenix, and it's such a lucky piece that I
Oh.
thought, you know? Well,
Here.
the bad news is I have had absolutely no rest.
Really?
The good news is I wrote 4 songs, and I, this morning, put them on a CD.
But it wasn't just Mick that acted as emotional support for Stevie. She actually brought just as much comfort to him. He believed in her star power and instinctively knew how much the band stood to gain from having her in it. And seeing her rally before their grueling touring schedule, despite her fragile health, and come up with brilliant songs for the band, Mick was inspired to go on. Quote, "We were under pressure. We were going mad. The only thing holding us together was a slender thread of Mac family cohesion. For me, it was Stevie, physically the most fragile of us all, who inspired our collective drive to create and prevail." End quote. It's hard to overstate how absolutely crazy Fleetwood Mac's touring and recording schedule was in the 70s. When Stevie and Lindsey first joined, the band acquired a laser focus on introducing them to their existing audience and gaining a new audience, now that their sound was about to become significantly different. Now, to their record company, Fleetwood Mac was known to be a band whose members often left the band while they were on tour. So thanks to this history of instability, Warner Brothers refused to advance them any touring money, which meant they had to really work to prove to the world they meant business this time. So, in 1975, Fleetwood Mac went on tour, traveling in a couple of station wagons, staying in cheap motels, and surviving on fast food and wine. They played 90 shows between September and November. That's 3 months, with 4 days playing and 1 day off, a schedule that Mick himself called quote-unquote very demanding. Stevie has said before that being in Fleetwood Mac was, quote, like being in the army, end quote. Unused to such rough conditions and having had no vocal training whatsoever, Stevie soon began to face issues with her voice and throat, particularly due to the passionate way she used to perform Rhiannon at this time. She was racked with anxiety about how the critics and the audience would perceive and receive her, and indulging in drugs and alcohol non-stop to cope. Stevie lost a scary amount of weight, and her health became extremely fragile. This is around when she wrote the song Sisters of the Moon, which is actually my favorite song of Stevie's with Fleetwood Mac. Though this alarmed her, Stevie refused to give up on her dream and fought through it, deciding she'd do whatever it took to stay in the band. Mick has similarly mentioned in his autobiography that his only real loyalty was to the band, which has obviously negatively affected his personal relationships. Fleetwood Mac expected to be prioritized by all of its members, no matter the circumstances or how dangerous it might have been to their physical and mental health. There was simply no other option. I guess it starts to make sense why it took full-on mental breakdowns for previous members to leave the band. Once the band achieved an initial bout of success with the release of singles like Over My Head and Rhiannon from their 1975 album Fleetwood Mac, their touring became more comfortable and luxurious as the record company gave them more money, but not any less frantic or grueling. On the contrary, the enormous success of their first 2 albums, Fleetwood Mac and Rumours, pressured them to work even harder, which led to such extreme extravagance and decadence that Fleetwood Mac became infamous for it. Their band rider included stuff like 14 black limos at their beck and call, having hotel rooms repainted and fitted with white grand pianos for Stevie and Chris, flying exclusively on private jets, which were sometimes flown empty to pick up the band's cocaine dealer, who was on payroll, a full-time Japanese masseuse, catering by top-notch California chefs, even though the food usually went uneaten due to the amounts of cocaine being consumed, and of course, their drug budget was huge. Mick Fleetwood later stated that he had spent an estimated $60 million on cocaine throughout his career. These circumstances basically created a bubble where the band and their inner circle became increasingly isolated from the real world, relying on each other and those around them for support. Stevie and Mick have both stated before that being in these extraordinary circumstances was a vital part of why their relationship happened in the first place. Being, as I mentioned, the most emotionally available members of the band, they naturally found solace in each other throughout this whole whirlwind. Now, despite their growing closeness and understated mutual affection, let's say, during 1975 and most of 1976, Stevie and Mick were allegedly not really considering being together yet. Stevie was still nursing the heartbreak over the end of her relationship with Lindsey, and she was dating around, including a brief relationship with Eagles drummer Don Henley, while Mick was still heavily involved with his on-again, off-again wife, Jenny Boyd. Over the years, Mick and Jenny's marriage had been rocked by infidelity from both sides, which was mostly a consequence of their deeper issues involving Mick's prioritization of the band over his own family. Mick's father, to whom he was very close, was also diagnosed with terminal cancer around this time, which, of course, aggravated Mick's feeling of vulnerability. Regardless, in October 1976, despite already having divorced her, Mick remarried Jenny. This was mostly a strategic move, so Jenny and their daughters could stay in America with him, but each time they got back together, Mick and Jenny genuinely tried to make it work. By his own admission, however, by this time, Mick was already aware he not only had feelings for Stevie, but was falling madly in love with her. For Stevie, though, it wasn't until the band's infamous 1977 Rolling Stone photo shoot that a physical spark actually ignited between the two. The cover photo had the 5 band members lying suggestively in bed together, with Lindsey and Chris cuddling to one side, then Mick and Stevie cuddling, and then finally John by himself reading an issue of Playboy magazine. By the way, I think this photo shoot illustrates just how heavily they were already leaning on the drama narrative to promote Rumours, even before it was released. According to Stevie, this first quote-unquote horizontal contact was what planted the seed in her mind of being with Mick, a seed that wouldn't bear fruit until several months later. The actual photo shoot, however, ended with Stevie and Lindsey making out on the mattress after Lindsey complimented Stevie's new breast implants. Mick recounts that when he came home from the shoot to his wife Jenny, this is the conversation they had. Quote, "In the course of the session, as I told Jenny in all seriousness, I had realized something vital. Stevie and I have definitely known each other in previous lives, I said, before going off to sleep. That image of the two of us cuddling, a large, satisfied smile on my face, and Stevie giggling beside me would later haunt Jenny for years to come." End quote. Let's put a pin on that. Throughout 1977, they went on a multi-leg tour to promote Rumours. While on break in LA, Mick began picking Stevie up at her house for secret midnight rides together, where they'd go hang out and stargaze. Mick would drive up to her house in his black Porsche, which is supposedly the great dark wing she mentions in her song Sara. But though one might argue the emotional portion of their affair had already begun, it apparently didn't become physical until they embarked on the last leg of their tour, which would take them to Japan, Hawaii, Australia, and New Zealand, where they would continue to go on their midnight rides together. Then, on November 6, 1977, after performing their last show in Auckland, New Zealand, Stevie and Mick snuck out of their hotel through the back door so as to not be seen by the rest of the band members, particularly the jealous and mercurial Lindsey, and got on their black Daimler limousine. As they silently held hands in the back seat, exhausted from the concert and just happy to be in each other's company, they were driven to a famous lookout where they strolled together and watched the sunrise over the breathtaking landscape. A fierce lightning storm accompanied them on the way back, later described by Mick as something straight out of King Lear. Delighting in the drama and romance of such a setting, Stevie and Mick clung to each other in the backseat of the car, and later in the hotel, they allegedly finally consummated their affair. Many years later, in his autobiography, Mick would reflect, quote, "It does make sense that things happened when they did, because we were both stretched so thin from the exhaustion of the road and the unhappiness in our private lives that we found solace in each other and in all the ways that we are alike. It was the great escape. We'd sneak away and take long drives through the Hollywood Hills. The clandestine nature of it was romantic, and it was even more so on tour in our own world within a world, where we could do as we pleased. In New Zealand, after a show, we spent the night driving up to a crater to see the sunrise. A light rain started to fall, and we huddled close together on the ride back to the hotel. And afterwards, we spent the entire day in bed together, without a care in the world. When we returned home from that tour, my relationship with Stevie was something very real. I was in love with her, and she loved me, and it was not something passing in the night. We were both in love with each other." End quote. Stevie and Mick then carried on with their now full-blown affair. There are conflicting sources on who knew what in the band. It seems that Christine McVie caught on rather quickly, but she was never the type to meddle because she honestly just didn't care. Stevie's squad of girlfriends also knew, but they were sworn to secrecy. Lindsey and John were allegedly unaware for a while, and Mick's wife Jenny was, of course, also kept in the dark. Mick admitted in his autobiography that for a while he tried to be in two places at once, trying to make it work with Jenny, but carrying on with Stevie behind her back. He fully admits how fucked up it was that he didn't tell Jenny, but their complicated history, which included her own infidelities, meant they couldn't quite connect. Stevie, for her turn, was not exclusively with Mick, but was dating around. When they got together, Stevie actually had a boyfriend, a young record executive called Paul Fishkin, who was decisive when it came to launching Stevie's solo career a few years later. Mick's wife Jenny actually joined them on tour that December, and the crew had to awkwardly try to keep her out of the way so she wouldn't find out about the affair. During one of their concerts, Mick and Jenny were standing hand in hand behind a curtain, waiting for the band to begin. Mick gave Jenny's hand a squeeze before stepping around the curtain where Stevie was waiting. The two secret lovers then kissed passionately, only inches away from Jenny, who remained oblivious behind the scrim. 10 years later, Stevie allegedly told Mick that had been one of the most amazing moments of her romantic life, which is honestly pretty impressive to begin with. Many of Stevie's iconic songs from the next several years, like Sara, Storm, Gems, and Angel, which were all included in Fleetwood Mac's next album, Tusk, were written about this experience with Mick, as well as about the wildness of life in Fleetwood Mac overall, because Stevie's songwriting style is pretty free-flowing and her themes blend together a lot. Despite the thrill of their secret affair, by early 1978, Mick described feeling eaten up by the guilt of keeping it from Jenny and from Lindsey Buckingham, whom he knew still had a complicated dynamic with Stevie despite their breakup a couple of years before. In his autobiography, Mick shares that his feelings for Stevie were so intense that he was tempted to blurt it out to his parents when Stevie came to visit them for breakfast one day, when Jenny was conveniently absent, but Mick's parents and children were there. Mick also stresses that it was really important to him that he honor his feelings for Stevie by coming clean to Lindsey, which he then did. Apparently, he needn't have dreaded it so much. Lindsey just calmly said something like, "Okay, I understand." At least, that's how he reacted to Mick's face. Stevie would pay the price for this later on, but that's a topic for another video. Or not. I'm just not going to touch that. But the curious thing is that Mick also shares a bizarre little anecdote from back when he and Lindsey had first met in 1975. Mick recounts their conversation as they shared a joint in Lindsey's room after their concert. Quote, "We were relaxing, sitting there, when out of the blue he said, 'So, it's you and Stevie, isn't it?' 'What?' I said. I was sure I'd heard him right, but wasn't sure what he meant. 'What do you mean? She's your girlfriend.' 'Yeah,' he said, giving me an odd look. 'It's you and Stevie.' It freaked me out completely, but I neither reacted nor said anything else because I was in shock. What he'd said hit me in the gut, amplified all the more because I was stoned. As off the wall as it was, I felt terrible that he'd thought that about her and me even for a minute. At the time, I'd not given it a thought. Of course, I found Stevie attractive. I don't think there was a man or woman who didn't, but nothing more. She was Lindsey's girlfriend. This conversation took place years before the spark of anything between us began, but the irony is that Lindsey was right. It was pure intuition because his interpretation at the time was incorrect, but his premonition that there was something powerful between Stevie and me was entirely correct. What he felt finally manifested itself. Eventually, I fell in love with her, and it was chaotic. It was on the road, and it was a crazy love affair that went on longer than any of us really remember, probably several years by the end of it. What else can I say? Other than Lindsey has always been ahead of his time." End quote. Apparently, Lindsey does not remember this at all. After agonizing over it for several months, torn between his genuine love for Stevie and his attachment and love for his family, Mick finally had the guts to tell his wife Jenny about the affair. He describes feeling extremely confused, just hoping and praying that something would happen to break him out of it and show him the right path. After spending some lovely holidays in Ireland reconnecting with Jenny, Mick finally told her he had been having an affair with Stevie. Jenny was angry and confused about why he had made it seem like they were reconnecting, like things were okay between them, like they were gonna be okay, only to spring this on her and tell her he was actively cheating on her. She felt stupid and betrayed, racking her brain for clues she might have missed. She thought of their intimate Rolling Stone photo shoot and how Mick had told her he'd realized he'd known Stevie in a previous life. Like Mick said in his autobiography, it did absolutely haunt her. It was this that would finally put an end to their marriage several months later. Before that, however, a barbecue was thrown by Lindsey and his then-girlfriend Caroline Harris for the members of the Fleetwood Mac inner circle. Despite being personally invited, Stevie did not attend the barbecue, since Mick had told her he'd reveal their affair to Jenny. At the barbecue, a tearful Jenny took Caroline, Lindsey's girlfriend, aside and told her all about the affair, meaning it was officially no longer a secret. Though Caroline claims Jenny didn't seem angry at Stevie, instead pointing to Mick's drug and alcohol abuse as the main factors in her deciding to leave him, things went a little differently a couple of weeks later, on June 1st, 1978, at John McVie's wedding to Julie Rubens. This was an unfortunate day for Stevie. First, she had the bright idea to show up wearing white, thus upstaging the bride. And this is not the only time she's done this, by the way, but we'll get to that in a minute. Caroline Harris describes that at the wedding reception at John and Julie's home, guests friends became alarmed when they heard two women arguing loudly. Looking for the source of the disturbance, Carol Ann came upon Jenny confronting Stevie about the affair inside the bride's closet. According to her, an angry Jenny stood glaring at Stevie and yelling things like, "How could you? Think of his children," while Stevie nervously tried to talk her way out of it. Meanwhile, Carol Ann tried to swallow her secondhand embarrassment that they were being quote-unquote so trailer parked and brought in Stevie's best friend Robin to intervene. Robin then collected Stevie and they left the party. Jenny allegedly told Carol Ann that it was seeing Stevie in a white dress at somebody else's wedding that had actually made her snap and lose her cool like that. Now, despite Mick's alleged impassioned feelings for both Stevie and Jenny, back in February 1978, after he had told Lindsey but before he told Jenny, Mick's eye had already begun wandering. When Stevie and her girlfriends vacationed in Maui during their tour break, a forlorn Mick begged to join her, confessing he could feel their affair cooling off and he didn't want that to happen. Mick claimed he was under a lot of pressure at that time, tormented by the guilt of lying to his wife and constantly worrying about business. Stevie tried to reassure him and asked her friends to be welcoming. Mick's brother-in-law, George Harrison, was also vacationing in Maui at the time and spent an afternoon hanging out at Stevie's pool while she tried, unsuccessfully, to get him to write a song with her. One of Stevie's closest friends in her squad was a woman called Sara Recor, wife of road manager Jim Recor. Described by Mick as, quote, gorgeous, charming, gregarious, funny, and extremely warm, former model Sara would hang out with Mick by the pool when Stevie was out, and Mick's interest in her became somewhat obvious, to the point where Stevie herself teased him about it. Stevie and Sara's friendship had an interesting history. Jim Recor, Sara's then husband, had met Stevie at work, and the two became extremely close. It is heavily implied and alleged that they had a full-blown affair, and while Sara suspected it, once she met Stevie, she grew to love her so much that she didn't really care, especially since she felt her marriage had been all but over anyway. Mick and Sara grew ever closer throughout 1978. And as Mick felt himself fall in love with her, he confided in the band's secretary, Judy Wong, who discreetly found out he had a chance. Despite being supposedly appalled at himself for, quote, pursuing another man's wife, unquote, Mick decided to throw caution to the wind and actively pursue Sara, who confessed that she reciprocated his feelings. According to Carol Ann Harris, Lindsey's girlfriend at the time, Mick had told Sara he'd already broken things off with Stevie, but Sara knew it was a lie. Then, in November 1978, basically about a year after Stevie and Mick had first gotten together that night in Auckland, New Zealand, Sara abruptly left her husband and moved in with Mick, which threw the world of Fleetwood Mac upside down. Absolutely devastated and humiliated by this double cross, Stevie allegedly locked herself in her room for several days, feeling that she had lost her boyfriend and her best friend in one fell swoop. Since the band couldn't exactly ostracize their own drummer, and well, because of misogyny, the brunt of the social price of their affair fell upon Sara, who became a pariah within the band's inner circle for a while. Mick claims that he wrote Stevie an earnest breakup letter, never imagining it would hurt her so deeply. He was a little confused by her reaction. After all, while Mick hadn't dated anyone other than Stevie after Jenny left him, Stevie had had multiple casual relationships and didn't seem to want to be exclusive. He had the distinct impression that he was way more invested into the relationship than she was. Regardless, Stevie's ego was wounded and her heart was broken, which yielded many great songs for the Tusk recording sessions, but it meant that vibes were absolutely rancid in the studio for a while there. But that was nothing new for Fleetwood Mac, and eventually things blew over and they became friends again. Stevie's song Sara is obviously partly inspired by this whole debacle, but my favorite song from this era and about Mick in general is the country-flavored If You Ever Did Believe, which was later released as part of the soundtrack of the 1998 movie Practical Magic. Sheryl Crow, who produced the track, confirmed in a 1998 Entertainment Weekly interview that the song is about Mick. So it went that Mick Fleetwood began the year of 1978 married to Jenny Boyd and having an affair with Stevie Nicks, and he ended the year of 1978 having left Stevie Nicks and moved in with Sara. It wasn't until 1988, however, that he and Sara officially married, by then an attempt to save a failing relationship. Stevie wore a white dress to their wedding. Though Stevie eventually forgave Mick for leaving her, they had other tough moments throughout the years. In 1980, when Mick was accused of mismanaging the band's funds after their high-grossing Tusk tour failed to make them any money because it was all spent on drugs and limos and repainting hotel suites, Stevie finally got her own manager to speak for her in Fleetwood Mac. Yes, that's right, up until this point, there was literally no one defending Stevie's interests in the band. Remember the boyfriend she was with when she got with Mick, Paul Fishkin? He was apparently appalled to see how the band treated Stevie and how little say she had in the band's affairs, considering how significant she was as a front woman for the band. Again, the band's only #1 single ever was a Stevie Nicks song. This, understandably, caused some tension between Stevie and Mick, as did Stevie's decision to launch a solo career in parallel to Fleetwood Mac. But their biggest feud took place in 1991, when Mick refused to let Stevie have her song Silver Springs, which had been produced for Rumours, but ultimately discarded from the album due to its length and the fact that Lindsey felt the song was too harsh on him. Stevie had originally gifted the rights to the song to her mother, certain that she was ensuring her mother's future by doing that. And then when the song was discarded from Rumours, Stevie was heartbroken. Not just because she cared about the song a great deal, it was probably her favorite song on Rumours by far, but also the embarrassment of having promised it to her mother only to have it not be released, which again evidenced how little say she had in the band's affairs. So Stevie, who had never gotten over the fact that Silver Springs was removed from Rumours like that, was hoping to finally release the song in her 1991 compilation album Time Space. But Mick, eternally facing money troubles, was eager to release a 25th anniversary version of Rumours the following year, and he wanted to include the song for the first time, so he refused to let Stevie have it for her compilation album. Stevie took years to forgive him, and if you look back at her solo concerts from around this time, she was so angry at Mick that she changed the lyrics to Goldust Woman from "Take your silver spoon and dig your grave" to, quote, "Take your silver springs and dig your grave," end quote. But except for Lindsey, with whom she still has a pretty volatile relationship, Stevie seems to be a pretty forgiving person, and she gets along pretty well with her former lovers, and Mick is no exception. Even when he wrote about their relationship in his 1990 autobiography, thus finally revealing it to the world, even that didn't displease her. As she put it, quote, "It was a great love affair, something I would never trade in a million years," end quote. Stevie has hinted before that she considers Mick to be one of the 3 great loves of her life, the other 2 being presumably Lindsey Buckingham and, randomly, Eagles guitarist Joe Walsh. As illustrated by their dynamic in the Destiny Rules documentary, Stevie and Mick are friendly and sweet to each other, and their deep mutual respect endures. In Mick's own words, quote, "She and I joke about it to this day. There was tremendous passion," end quote. I just love these messy elderlies. Can't get enough of them. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you like this kind of content, vintage gossip, ice cold tea, please consider subscribing to the channel, because that's what we're about here. We also have a Patreon, a Ko-fi, and channel memberships if you'd like to support us further. And if you even consider that, thank you. Leave me a comment to let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Bye!